She gave her son's only blanket to a freezing stranger, 29 years old. 2 jobs and a Sunday side hustle. $40 left to her name. And she handed that over too, pressed into a shaking palm so the old man could get a hot meal somewhere out of the wind. It was 9 at night in Cleveland, and the snow was coming sideways off Lake Erie. The man on the bus shelter bench was soaked through, trembling, his thin coat no match for the cold. Imani Carver didn't think about it. She knelt down in the slush, tucked the blanket around his shoulders the way you'd cover a sleeping child, and said, "Stay warm, sir. Nobody should be out here like this." Picture it, a young black woman in a server's apron kneeling in the snow at a bus shelter, wrapping a child's blanket around a shivering old man, while across the dark water behind them, a glass tower with his name carved over the doors glowed like a lighthouse nobody on her block could afford to enter. That blanket smelled like fabric softener and a little boy. But the man shivering inside it had built a children's hospital worth more than $1 billion. And in 48 hours, her 6-year-old son would need that very hospital to keep him alive. She had no idea who he was, no idea what was coming. All she carried out into that storm were 5 words her father had pressed into her hands a long time ago, words she was about to need more than air. But the trembling man on that bench was no vagrant. And 90 minutes earlier, he had walked out of a room where the fate of his life's work had just been decided. To understand why Imani Carver gave away the last warm thing she owned, you have to understand the world that raised her, and the weight she was already carrying through it. She grew up in Glenville, on Cleveland's east side, in a brick 2-family off St. Clair Avenue, where everybody on the block knew whose child you were. Her block had its own economy of grace, the kind that never shows up in anybody's statistics. Ms. Pearl next door watched half the children on the street for nothing but a plate at Thanksgiving. Mr. Year, Ray at the barber shop on Superior gave Eli his lineup for free every other Saturday and told him he was getting handsomer than his granddaddy, which wasn't possible, but it made the boy sit up straighter. The corner store let a tab ride to the first of the month and never said a word about it. Nobody out there had money. Everybody out there had each other. That was the arithmetic Imani was raised on. She worked at Miss Odell's Kitchen, a soul food place on St. Nene, Claire that had been feeding the neighborhood since 1979, back when Miss Odell opened it with her late husband's pension and a cast-iron skillet she still refused to retire. The vinyl booths were patched with duct tape. The sweet tea was never empty, and the smell of collard greens and smothered turkey wings reached the sidewalk before you reached the door. Imani prepped greens and yams from 4 in the afternoon, then ran tables until close. On a good night, she walked out with $31.75 in tips, counted twice on the bus, folded flat into a coffee can on top of the refrigerator. On a bad night, it was less than half bad. Before the diner, 3 mornings a week, she cleaned an office tower downtown for $13.85 an hour, emptying the trash of people whose names she'd never know, who would never know hers. And on Sunday afternoons, after church, she braided hair on her mother's porch in Huff, $45 a head, 3 or 4 heads on a blessed week. Little girls squirming between her knees while the radio played gospel and the grease warmed in her palm. Nearly a third of single-mother households in this country live below the poverty line. Imani wasn't a statistic to herself. She was just a woman doing the math. $8 of gas, or $8 of groceries, the electric bill, or the phone she needed on, because the hospital might call. Every day was a column of numbers that never balanced, and she had gotten very good at choosing which thing to go without, and at making sure the thing she went without was never anything her son could see. She drove a 2007 Corolla with 219,000 miles on it. In the cold, it took 3 tries to turn over, and lately, a 4th. She'd learned to leave 15 extra minutes for the cold. She'd learned to leave extra room for a lot of things. And then there was Eli. Elijah Carver was 6 years old, and he loved lighthouses. He could name a dozen of them up and down the Great Lakes, drew them on every scrap of paper that sat still long enough, tall white towers with one yellow window burning at the top. He kept a worn brass lighthouse keychain clipped to the strap of his backpack, the metal scratched soft and dull from 40 years of pockets. It had belonged to his grandfather, Joseph Carver, who'd worked 31 years on the ore boats out of the Cleveland docks, one of the black men who kept the steel moving while the country argued about whether he should be allowed in the Union Hall. Joe bought that keychain in a gift shop in Marquette, Michigan. The first season they let him work the deck instead of the galley, and he carried it through every hard year after. And whenever the world got mean, which was often, he would take his daughter's face in his big rough hands and say the same 5 words. "Keep your light on, baby." He said it when the plant cut her mother's hours. He said it when the bank said no. He said it the night he died, with the oxygen line in his nose and her hand inside both of his, like he was passing her something she couldn't see. Imani had been saying it to Eli ever since. What Imani didn't know, what she wouldn't let herself fully see, was that the headache Eli woke with most mornings was getting worse. He'd learned to hide it. He was 6 years old, and he had already learned to hide it, because he'd watched his mother's face when the bills came out of the envelope, and he did not want to be another bill. He would press his small hand against the back of his head, breathe through the sick feeling, and when she asked how he was doing, he'd smile that gap-toothed smile and say, "The light's still on, Mama." Some mornings he threw up before school and rinsed the sink so she wouldn't find it. Some afternoons the room tilted when he stood up too fast, and he held the wall and counted to 10 until it stopped. He never told her about the wall. Remember that, because the wall is coming back into this story, and it will break your heart when it does. 3 months ago, the pediatrician at the free clinic on Superior had watched Eli walk the length of the hallway, watched his eyes drift down and to the side, felt the back of his head, and gotten very quiet. She sent them for a scan that same week. The word that came back was one Imani couldn't pronounce the first time, and would never stop pronouncing after. Medulloblastoma, a tumor at the base of his brain, in the part called the posterior fossa, sitting right where the fluid drains, and it was beginning to dam that fluid up like a fist closing slowly around a garden hose. He needed surgery. Not someday. Soon. The estimate was $310,000. Her Medicaid would cover a portion. She was still short $118,000 she did not have, had never had, and could not imagine having. She called the hospital 4 times. 4 times, a woman read her the same policy in the same flat voice. Without insurance clearance or a deposit of $35,000, they could not schedule the surgical consultation. Imani filled out applications at 2 in the morning at the kitchen table, every foundation, every fund, every form. She learned that desperation has a waiting list. And the waiting list has a waiting list. Her church did what her church has always done. New Hope Missionary Baptist took up a love offering 2 Sundays running, and Pastor Green pressed a manila envelope into her hands with $1,214 in it. 10s and 20s and 1 check from Mother Hattie for $100 that Imani knew was Mother Hattie's whole light bill. The online fundraiser her cousin set up raised $612 from people who had nothing to spare and spared it anyway. Against a mountain of $118,000, her whole world had emptied its pockets and bought her a handful of gravel. She thanked God for the gravel. Then she cried in the shower where the water would cover the sound, because crying was for places her son couldn't hear. That night, the night of the snow, she almost didn't stop at the shelter at all. Her shift had run long. Earl Dawkins, the old dishwasher at Miss Odell's, a deacon at New Hope who'd known her daddy from the docks, had quietly taken half her prep so she could get out the door the way he quietly slipped a folded 20 into her apron pocket some Fridays and pretended he hadn't. On her way out, he caught her arm and said, "Baby girl, you can't pour from a dry cup. Take care of you two, here." She laughed and said she would, and they both knew she was lying. Then she saw the man shaking on the bench, soaked through, alone in the kind of cold that kills people in this city every single winter. And she did what Joe Carver's daughter does. She gave him the warm thing and the last $40 and a smile she did not have the energy for. And she told him about the warming shelter 6 blocks up on 18th, like she'd memorized it for somebody just like him. Because she had. She got on the bus and rode home and didn't think about him again. She had no way of knowing that 6 miles up the shoreline, in a glass tower on the lakefront, a man had spent that same hour losing the thing he loved most in the world. And she had no way of knowing that the stranger wrapped in her son's blanket was about to learn her name. August Bellamy was 76 years old, and he had built the Bellamy Children's Institute out of grief. He came up in Huff in the 1950s. In a third-floor walk-up where the radiator clanked all night and the rent was somehow still too high. The son of a woman who rode 2 buses every morning to clean houses in Shaker Heights and rode them back every night with other people's leftovers wrapped in foil. August was 9 years old when he understood that his mother scrubbed floors in homes with more bathrooms than his whole building had, and that the children in those homes saw doctors the way his block saw the mailman. He was a teenager when Hoff burned in the summer of 1966, and he stood on a corner watching the smoke and understood something else, that a neighborhood can be full of brilliant, decent, hardworking people and still be treated like it is disposable. And he remembered Forest City Hospital. Most people have never heard of it, and that is its own kind of crime. In 1957, black doctors in Cleveland, men and women who had finished at the top of their classes and still couldn't get privileges at the white hospitals, pulled their money and their nerve and opened a hospital of their own in Glenville, so their people would have somewhere to be treated with dignity. August's mother took him there when the asthma got bad. He never forgot what it felt like to be touched by a doctor who looked at him like he was somebody's son. When the doors of a system close on you, his mother told him on the bus home, "You build your own door." He was going to spend his whole life learning how true that was, because before any of the wealth, before the tower with his name on it, August Bellamy had a daughter, Eleanor, Ellie. Born in 1965, gap-toothed and fearless, crazy about birds. In the spring of 1971, she started getting headaches in the morning, the way children do. Then she stopped being able to walk a straight line down the hallway. August and his wife carried her from clinic to clinic, and the clinics that would see a young black couple without insurance were underfunded and overwhelmed. And the machines that could look inside a child's head in 1971 barely existed anywhere at all, and certainly not anywhere they could reach. By the time anyone saw what was growing at the base of his little girl's brain, it had taken too much. She was 6 years old. He held her in a county ward at the end, and he made her a promise he had no power on this earth to keep. He spent the next 50 years building the power. He worked, he studied, he built a medical supply business out of a rented garage, then a second business, then a third. He took every door that closed in his face and wrote the address down. And in time, August Bellamy became one of the wealthiest black men in the state of Ohio, and he poured the better part of that fortune into 9 stories of glass on the Cleveland lakefront. The Bellamy Children's Institute, one of the finest pediatric neurological centers in the Midwest. His name was carved over the doors. Ellie's name was on the children's wing. On opening day, he stood on the front steps, with church buses idling at the curb and half of Glenville and Huff in their Sunday best on the sidewalk, and he made the promise out loud this time, so there would be witnesses. "This hospital will never turn a child away, not ever, not while I am breathing." That night, on the top floor of that same building, his own board voted to break it. Sterling Health Partners, a private equity group out of Dallas, had put an offer on the table that made grown men go quiet. 3 times the valuation. A tidy exit. The kind of number that turns a hospital into a line item. 8 directors around a slab of black walnut and August watched the dollar signs move behind their eyes while they talked about EBITDA and bed turnover and right-sizing the charity exposure, as if children were inventory that wasn't moving fast enough. And a loudest voice in favor of the sale belonged to his own son. Dr. Marcus Bellamy was 44, Morehouse College, then Stanford for medicine, then the fellowship across town that made him one of the top pediatric neurosurgeons in the country. Hands so steady the residents called him the metronome. His father had wept at every one of those graduations. But somewhere along the climb, Marcus had stopped seeing patients and started seeing throughput. "Dad, this is the responsible move," he said, leaning back in his chair, the A, longe and sonne on his wrist catching the light. We can't run a hospital on idealism in this market. Sentiment is not a strategy. August looked at his son in his beautiful biryani suit. This brilliant man he had raised on stories of Forest City Hospital, and saw a stranger wearing a face he loved. This place was built so no child would ever die the way my daughter died, he said quietly. Your sister. I know the story, Dad. You knew her name. Once. The room held its breath. 8 people he had trusted for decades, and not one of them would meet his eye. He stood up slowly, all 76 of his years in his knees, and said only, "It will not be sold while I'm breathing." Then he walked out. He didn't call for the Maybach idling in the garage. He didn't take the private elevator. He walked straight out the front doors into the storm in his good wool coat and his thin Italian shoes, down along the dark water, into snow that soaked him to the skin inside of 3 blocks. He barely felt it. The cold inside was worse, betrayed by the boy he raised, betrayed by the people he'd built it all beside. 76 years old and tired in a way that sleep does not fix. He ended up at a bus shelter near 18th Street, a cracked plastic roof doing nothing against the wind, and he sat down hard on the metal bench. His hand shook, and not only from the weather. To anyone passing, he was just another old black man the city had stopped seeing a long time ago. A security guard leaned out of the warm lobby across the way, looked him up and down, said, "Sir, you can't loiter here," and went back inside. Policy. Nothing personal. That sentence right there was the whole disease. And then a young woman in a thin server's apron knelt down in the slush in front of him. He watched her pull a child's blanket out of her bag, and he could see what it cost her. He could see she had nothing to spare and was sparing it anyway. He watched her press money into his hand without being asked, watched her rub her own arms against the cold she'd just given away her answer to, and heard her tell him about the warming shelter 6 blocks up, like she kept that address polished for strangers. He saw the keys in her other hand, and the little brass lighthouse swinging from the ring, catching the streetlight, swinging like something at the top of a tower telling a lost boat where the rocks are. He did not tell her who he was. He could not have spoken if he'd tried. Something he thought that boardroom had killed for good moved in his chest, painful, like blood coming back into a frozen hand. Not the cold, the opposite of the cold. When her bus hissed away into the snow, August Bellamy sat alone at a bus shelter in the city he'd conquered, wrapped in a stranger's blanket that smelled of fabric softener and a child, and for the first time since 1971, he put his face in his hands and wept. Then he wiped his eyes, and he reached for the phone he hadn't touched all night. He was about to learn that the woman who just saved him was someone his own hospital had already broken, and the next morning, a name on a screen would stop his heart. August Bellamy was at his desk before the sun came up. He had not slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the young woman kneeling in the slush, the brass lighthouse swinging from her keys, the blanket that cost her something she didn't have. He called the one person at the institute who had been there longer than the marble in the lobby. Yolanda Briggs was not a nurse and not a doctor. For 30 years she had worked the family side of medicine, the side without machines, the woman who sat with parents in the worst hour of their lives and helped them find a door when every door was shut. She was a Glenville girl herself, sang alto at her church, and had a gift for telling powerful men the truth in a voice that left no exits. Yoli picked up on the second ring. "August Bellamy calling me before my coffee's even brewed. This better be good. I need to find someone, Yoli." "A young woman. Last night, lakefront, near the 18th Street shelter. She works in a restaurant somewhere. She had the apron on under her coat, and there's a small brass lighthouse on her key ring." He paused, and his voice did something it didn't usually do. "She gave me her coat, more or less. I want to do something for her, and all I have is an apron and a lighthouse." Yoli was quiet a moment. "That's a needle in a haystack the size of Cuyahoga County, you know that." "I know that. I know. Look anyway." He didn't know it yet, but he would never have to look at all. The haystack was about to come through his own front doors, carried in a mother's arms. Across town that morning, Imani's phone rang while she was counting out bus fare. It was her mother. Ernestine Carver was 61, an usher at New Hope for 30 years. A woman who ironed her dress on Saturday night so Sunday morning could be about the Lord. She lived in the small house in Huff that Joe had paid off a year before he passed. The only thing of value he ever got to leave her. "Baby, I've been up all night thinking," Ernestine said. "The house. I can sell the house. It's not much, but it's paid for. It could bring 60, maybe 70,000. That gets us more than halfway." "Mama, no. I'm Imani Renee Carver." "No, ma'am." Imani's voice cracked down the middle. "Daddy worked 31 years on that water so you would never have to ask anybody for anything. I am not burying your home to dig my way out. I'll find a way. I always find a way." She breathed. "Keep your light on, Mama. You sound just like your father," Ernestine said softly, and Imani could hear her smiling and crying at the same time, and they hung up, and neither one of them believed a word of the brave parts. That night, the way broke. Eli barely touched his plate at dinner. He went to bed quiet. Too quiet. And at 10:15, he sat straight up in the dark and was sick all over the floor. Then he looked up at her, and his eyes were not pointing the same way. "Mama." His voice came out thick and slow, like he was talking up through water. "Mama, the room is sideways, the wall, the counting." All those afternoons he'd held himself up so she wouldn't worry, and her body had known for months what her heart could not afford to know, and now it was here, all of it, at once. She grabbed her keys. The brass lighthouse bit into her palm. She carried him down the stairs into the cold and laid him across the front, back seat of the Corolla and turned the key. It coughed. It died. She turned it again. A click. The wind off the lake. A third time. A fourth. Her son's breath was going strange behind her, and she had $11 in her pocket and a quarter tank she couldn't spare, and the car would not start, would not start, would not start. So she ran. She wrapped Eli inside her own coat and ran the 2.5 blocks to St. Clair with him against her chest. 46 pounds of boy getting heavier and looser with every step, slush soaking through her shoes, and when the headlights of the night bus came swimming up out of the snow, she stepped halfway into the street and screamed. The driver was a woman named Miss Dorothy who had run that route for 19 years and knew her regulars by their stops. She took one look at the child, gray-faced, slack, one pupil blown wide and dark, and she didn't say a word about fare. She keyed her radio. "Dispatch, I have a medical emergency on board. A child, unresponsive. I need a squad to meet me at St. Clair and East 55th, now." Then she pulled the door shut, held Imani's shoulder with one hand, and drove that bus like it was an ambulance, because tonight it was. The paramedics took him at 55th. And the nearest hospital with a pediatric neurosurgery team, the best one for 500 miles in any direction, was a tower of glass on the lakefront, with a name over the doors. Bellamy Children's Institute, the hospital that had told his mother 4 times to come back when she had $35,000. The doors, the lights, the words coming too fast to hold. Pressures climbing. Left pupils fixed. He's posturing. GCS is dropping. Scans up. There. Posterior fossa mass, 4th ventricle shut. The fluid has nowhere to go, and it is pushing his brainstem down. How long? Somebody tell me how long he has. Hours. Not days. Hours. A resident threaded an external drain into Eli's skull right there to let the pressure off. A borrowed time valve. A thumb in the dam. The numbers eased. Ellie's small chest kept rising. And Imani stood in a white hallway in a server's apron with $11 in her pocket, watching machines breathe with her son, saying her father's 5 words over and over inside her chest like a rope she was climbing. Then a woman in a gray cardigan found her with a clipboard. "Miss Carver, I'm with Patient Financial Services. I see your son's case file here. Before we can schedule the surgical admission, I'll need to review the clearance requirements with you. There is a deposit of, he is dying." Imani's voice came out flat and scraped clean. "Tonight, right now. And you are standing here talking to me about a deposit. I understand this is difficult. Hospital policy requires financial clearance before a scheduled procedure. I'm sorry. It's the policy. And here is the thing you need to understand about the woman in the gray cardigan. She was not cruel, she was tired. She was a person reading words off a screen the way she had read them 10,000 times. A human being slowly turned into a turnstile by a system that needed her not to feel what she was saying. Imani looked at her for a long moment, and then she sat down in a plastic chair and put her face in her hands. She did not cry. She did not scream. She did not beg. Crying was for 2 in the morning, and it was not 2 yet. If you think you already know how this story ends, stay with me, because you don't. 2 floors up, a phone was about to ring in the dark, and the man who answered it was about to find out exactly who had just been carried through his doors. Yolanda Briggs was paged to the pediatric intensive care unit at 20 past midnight. Family in crisis, social work consult, single mother, 6-year-old with a posterior fossa tumor. She pulled the chart in the hallway. Carver, Elijah, age 6. Referred 3 months ago from the Superior Avenue Clinic. Surgical consultation canceled. Reason on the line. Financial clearance not met. The mother had called 4 times. 4 times, the same wall. Yoli closed her eyes. She had seen this file 100 times wearing 100 different names, and it had never once stopped being an obscenity to her. She straightened her badge and walked into the unit to find the mother, and then she stopped in the doorway. The woman in the chair had fallen asleep sitting up, the way only the truly exhausted can, still in a server's apron, her hand closed tight around a set of keys even in her sleep, and hanging from those keys, turning slowly in the green light of the monitors, was a small brass lighthouse, scratched soft and dull by 40 years of pockets. A young woman, a server's apron, a brass lighthouse on her keyring. Yoli stepped back into the hallway with her heart going sideways, and she called August Bellamy at home at midnight. You found her, Yoli said before he could speak. Or God found her for you, because she is here, right now, asleep in a chair in my ICU. She let out a breath. August, listen to me. Her name is Imani Carver. Her son is the medulloblastoma case we turned away 3 months ago. The boy almost died tonight because this hospital told his mother to go find $35,000. The woman who knelt in the snow for you, we turned away her child. The silence on the line went on. So long she thought the call had dropped. August, I'm here. His voice had gone somewhere very low and very old. Yoli, hear me. The money is handled. Tonight, quietly. No parent in this building hears the word deposit again while I am drawing breath. I will sign whatever needs my name on it before sunrise. That boy gets everything he needs if I have to carry the cost in my own 2 hands. Then I'll wake the on-call attending and we'll get him on the schedule. No. He stopped her. Not the on-call. The surgeon that boy needs is the best one in this building. And the best one in this building is my son. And Yoli, I cannot order Marcus to care. God knows I've tried. If I pull rank, he'll do a flawless operation and feel nothing. And next quarter, he'll vote to sell this place out from under the next Eli Carver. He has to walk into that room on his own 2 feet. He has to remember who he is. A pause, and the sound of an old man standing up in the dark. I'm coming in, and Yoli, don't tell her my name. Not yet. She doesn't owe me her gratitude, and I haven't earned her forgiveness. He understood something most powerful men never learn. You can buy a surgery. You cannot buy a conversion. And a system that turns away dying children does not get fixed by one quiet check from a guilty rich man. It gets fixed when the people running the machine remember they are people. August got Marcus to his office by 1 in the morning. His son arrived with a coat thrown over his scrubs, jaw tight, fully expecting to be guilt-tripped, already drafting his defense. And instead of pulling rank, instead of raising his voice, instead of doing any of the things Marcus had armored himself against on the drive over, his father told him a story. He told him about the snow, about walking out of the room where they had voted to sell Ellie's hospital, and how his legs had just kept going, out the doors, down the shoreline, until he was sitting on a metal bench at a bus shelter with the wind coming through him like he wasn't there. About a security guard who looked straight at him and saw nothing worth warming. He told him what it does to a man to be invisible in front of a building with his own name on it. And then he told him about a young woman in a thin apron who had nothing, who knelt down in the slush like he was somebody, and tucked her son's blanket around his shoulders, and gave him the last $40 she had on this earth, and told him where the warm place was. "That woman is downstairs right now," August said. "Her name is Imani Carver. Her boy is in your ICU with a tumor in the back of his head and a drain buying him hours, and he is alive tonight by the width of a bus driver's nerve. And Marcus, 3 months ago, this hospital told her to come back when she had $35,000. We did that. The line you called charity exposure in that boardroom has a name now. It has a face. It gives away its coat in a snowstorm." Marcus's jaw worked. "Dad, you cannot run a 9-story hospital by adopting every hard case that—" "When you were 12 years old," August said, "I took you past the lot where Forest City Hospital used to stand, and I told you about the doctors who built it. Do you remember what you said to me?" Marcus said nothing. The clock on the wall ticked. "You said, 'They fixed the part nobody else would touch, Daddy.' I want to do that. I want to fix the broken parts nobody else can reach." August's voice cracked, just once, just slightly. "Your sister had a broken part nobody could reach in time. You have spent your whole life learning to reach it. There is a 6-year-old boy 2 floors under your feet with the exact thing that killed Ellie, and his mother is sleeping in a plastic chair in her work apron, and you are standing in my office talking to me about exposure." The radiator ticked. Snow moved against the window like something trying to get in. Marcus stood, walked to the door and put his hand on the handle, and stood there with his back to his father for a long moment. "What's the boy's name?" he asked, without turning around. "Elijah," August said. "They call him Eli." Marcus opened the door and walked out into the hallway. He did not say yes, but he did not say no. And in the Bellamy family, his father knew that had always been the sound a heart makes when it starts to turn. Down on the 2nd floor, there is a small chapel that most people walk past. 4 short pews and a window of colored glass lit from behind because the real sky is too far away. At 2 o'clock in the morning, Imani Carver finally kept the appointment she had been postponing all night. Because crying was for 2 in the morning. That was the rule. That had always been the rule made the year Eli was born, kept through every diagnosis and every flat-voiced phone call and every night she counted his breathing. And now it was 2 in the morning at last. And her son was asleep under monitors 2 floors up. And the rule came due. She sat in the back pew and let it come. Not loud, never loud. She had spent 7 years learning to cry the way snow falls, and she did it now. Both hands wrapped around the brass lighthouse, her shoulders shaking and her mouth shut tight. A woman pouring out the whole year through a crack in herself 1 inch wide. She said her father's 5 words into the dark, once, twice, and on the 3rd time her voice gave out in the middle. And that was the truest prayer that little chapel heard all winter. She never heard the door. She only felt the pew shift. And there was Yolanda Briggs, off shift 3 hours and still in the building, because 30 years on this job had taught her where mothers go at 2 in the morning. Yoli didn't say it's going to be okay, because she had been doing this too long to spend those words cheap. She put her arm around a stranger's shoulders and said, "I got you, baby. Go on and put it down for a minute. I'll hold it." And Imani Carver, who had not leaned on anything since the day they folded a flag over her father, leaned. 15 minutes later she stood up, washed her face in the little bathroom and went back upstairs to her son with her back straight and her eyes clear, because the rule had a second half, and the second half was that when 2 o'clock was over, it was over. Neither woman ever told anybody about the chapel. I'm only telling you because you need to know what it actually cost to look as strong as she looked. Strength like hers is not the absence of breaking. It is a schedule for it. At 4:45 in the morning, Marcus Bellamy told himself he was only going to review the imaging. He pulled up the scans on his tablet in the dark of the surgeon's lounge, and his mind did what his mind did best. The tumor sat at the base of the boy's brain, exactly where these things sit. The 4th ventricle squeezed to a slit, the drain doing its quiet work in the meantime. A clean target for a man with his hands. Operable. A geometry problem. This was the part of medicine he still loved. The angles and the margins and the certainty. The part that never asked him to feel anything. Then he made a mistake. He took the long way to the surgical wing, past the intensive care unit, and the door to the corner room was open. The boy was awake, propped up against the pillows, small and brown and bird-boned, in a gown printed with faded stars. A drain taped to the side of his head, where they'd shaved a patch of his fresh Saturday lineup away. A monitor washed his face in soft green light, and he was drawing, tongue poking out of the corner of his mouth, completely absorbed, working a stubby pencil across the back of an admission form a night nurse had given him. His mother was asleep in the chair beside the bed, still in her apron, and even asleep her hand was wrapped around his ankle through the blanket, like a woman holding a dock line in weather. Ellie looked up and saw a man in scrubs standing in his doorway, and his whole face opened up into a gap-toothed grin. "Hi. Are you a doctor? You look like a doctor." Marcus should have kept walking. In 15 years he had reviewed 10,000 charts without ever needing to go into the room. He went into the room. "I'm Dr. Bellamy. My head hurts where the tube is," Eli reported, cheerful about it, like a weatherman covering a storm that was happening to somebody else. "But the medicine helps. Are you the one who's going to fix my brain?" Something that Marcus Bellamy had been holding together for 15 years with. Schedules and metrics and board decks shifted in his chest, quietly, like ice starting to go on the lake. He pulled the stool over and sat down. "I'm going to try." "What are you drawing?" Eli turned the paper around, proud as a deacon. A tall white tower. A single yellow window burning at the top of it. Dark water drawn in hard scribbled lines all around the base. And down at the bottom of the lighthouse, standing on the rocks, a small stick figure with braids, holding what looked like a ring of keys. "That's the lighthouse," Eli said. "And that's my mama. I drew her at the bottom because she's the part that holds the light up. She's the part that doesn't fall down." He glanced over at the sleeping woman, then leaned toward Marcus and lowered his voice, sharing the great secret of his life. "My mama is the lighthouse. She just doesn't know it yet." Marcus looked at the drawing for a long time, longer than he had looked at anything that wasn't a scan in years. Then his eyes went to the small brass lighthouse clutched in the boy's other fist, taken off the backpack strap and held on to the way some children hold a stuffed animal, scratched soft. 40 years of pockets. The exact object his father had described in the dark of his office. At 1 in the morning, swinging from the keys of a woman kneeling in the snow. "You can have it if you want," Eli offered, meaning the drawing. "I can make my mama another one. I make her lots." "I'd be honored," Marcus said, and his voice did not sound like a man who said words like throughput. He stayed 11 minutes. He learned that lighthouses have different flash patterns so the ships can tell them apart in the dark, which Eli explained with his hands. He learned about the dog Eli was going to get when he was bigger and the bike he was going to ride all the way around the lake when his head was fixed, and that his grandpa used to be on the boats the lighthouses were for, which meant, if he thought about it, that the lighthouse had been taking care of his family since before he was born. Marcus watched the numbers on the monitor while the boy talked. He watched the mother's hand around the small ankle, holding on even in her sleep. Then he went and found Imani at the end of the hall, standing in front of a vending machine, staring at the glass and not putting any money in, because there was no money to put in. "Ms. Carver, I'm Dr. Marcus Bellamy. I've spent the last hour with your son's imaging." He watched her brace, watched her shoulders come up the way they must have come up 100 times this year, getting ready for one more polite no. "The tumor is serious. It is also operable, and I've done this exact operation many times. The drain is buying us a window, and we need to use it. I want to take your son to surgery this morning." Her face went 3 places at once. Hope, then arithmetic, then the brace again. "Doctor, I want that more than I want my next breath. But I've been told 4 times. Without $35,000, this hospital won't even schedule." "I didn't ask you about money," Marcus said. "I asked if you'll let me fix your son." She stared at him. The hallway hummed. "Why?" she said finally, and it wasn't suspicion in her voice. It was wonder. The kind that's afraid of itself. Why would you do that? Marcus thought about a story told in the dark at 1 in the morning, about a lot in Glenville where a hospital used to stand. About a sister whose name he had let himself stop saying. Because somebody reminded me why I became a doctor, he said. Let me be one. Imani pressed her hand flat over her mouth. She nodded and kept nodding, because the words weren't coming, and when they finally came, they came out broken. Thank you. You don't know what this means. I think I do, he said. And for the first time in a very long time, he meant it. Then she caught it. Her eyes moved to the embroidery on his scrub jacket and something behind them flickered. Bellamy, she said slowly. Like the building. Like the name over the door. My father built this place. A shadow crossed her face, a question starting to take shape somewhere far back. Some echo of a December bench she couldn't place yet. But it didn't land. Not yet. The doors at the end of the hall swung open. The day shift was arriving. Her son was going to surgery, and there was no room in her chest for one more impossible thing. Because Imani Carver still had no idea who the man in the snowstorm had been. And when she found out, 2 days from now, in a room with his name on the door, it was going to take everything she believed about that night and turn it over like a stone. If you've come this far, you already know the surgery had to happen. But the question this story is really asking is what happens after. And that is where it stops being the story you think it is. They took Eli back at 6 in the morning. Inside the window the drain had bought. Imani walked beside the gurney the whole way, holding his hand, matching her steps to the wheels. At the double doors marked surgical wing, authorized personnel only. The nurse touched her arm gently, and Imani knelt down and took her son's face in both hands, the way her father used to take hers. When you wake up, she whispered, your head won't hurt anymore, and come summer, you are going to ride that bike all the way around this lake. As far as you want, fast as you want, faster than the wind. Faster than the wind, baby. He smiled, foggy and brave under the lights. Then he worked his little fist open and pressed the brass lighthouse into her palm and folded her fingers shut around it, his hands moving with the seriousness of a 6-year-old performing a sacrament. You hold it, Mama. Keep your light on, so I can find my way back to you. The door swung shut, and Imani Carver stood in an empty hallway with her hand still shaped around a hand that wasn't there. And that is where her mother found her 5 minutes later and caught her and held on, and neither of them said one word because there are no words for those doors. And every mother who has ever stood in front of them knows it. The waiting room was on the 3rd floor. Beige walls, plastic chairs, a television up in the corner playing the morning news on mute, a clock whose second hand moved slower than any clock either of them had ever watched. Ernestine sat with her purse on her knees and her Bible on her purse, and after a while she began to hum low, almost under the air conditioning. His eye is on the sparrow, the way she hummed it ironing on Saturday nights, because if her hands and her throat were busy they could not shake. At 7:30, Yoli came in with 3 coffees, nobody drank, and stayed, steady as a piling in the water. And at 8:15, the elevator opened, and the 3rd floor of the Bellamy Children's Institute got a visit from Glenville. Pastor Green in his good gray suit, Earl Dawkins straight off the overnight, still smelling faintly of dish steam, holding his cap in both hands, Mother Hattie with a thermos of real coffee and a pound cake in foil, because somebody had to think about whether these children had eaten. Miss Pearl. 2 ushers. They came in quiet, and they filled that beige room with something the architects had never planned for. And when Pastor Green took Imani's hands and said, let's just hold on together a while, the whole row of plastic chairs became a pew. 1 hour. 2. 3. Imani paced, 12 steps one way, 12 steps back, the lighthouse in her fist, her thumb moving over the worn brass the way her father's thumb used to. Her mother hummed. Earl prayed with his eyes open, watching the doors, an old dock man keeping watch. And 2 floors up, alone in his office, August Bellamy sat in front of a security feed of that waiting room and watched a neighborhood hold a mother up. He watched the pastor and the pound cake and the old man with the cap in his hands, And he thought about church buses idling outside this building on the day it opened, and the promise he'd shouted from the steps. And for the first time since 1971, August Bellamy let himself cry without stopping it. Not for the board, not for the company. For a little girl who loved birds, and a little boy who loved lighthouses, and all the years in between when the machine he built had run exactly the way the world taught it to. At 17 minutes past noon, 6 hours and a lifetime after the doors closed, they opened again, and Marcus came out in his surgical gown with his mask pulled down around his neck. And the whole room stood up at once like a congregation. Ms. Carver, she could not breathe. We got it, all of it. The tumor is out, the fluid is moving the way it's supposed to, and his brain is his own again. He let that land. And then he gave her the truth, because she had earned the truth. He's not done. There's a road ahead, treatment, rehab, months of it, and I will walk every step of it with you. But the part that takes children, that part is behind him. Ellie is going to grow up. Her knees went. Her mother caught her on one side and Earl caught her on the other, and the waiting room of the Bellamy Children's Institute broke into the kind of sound that beige rooms almost never hear, crying and laughing, and somebody saying "Thank you, Jesus" over and over. And a nurse passing in the hallway stopped, and put her hand flat against her own chest, and stood there a moment before she could walk on. 3 days later, a nurse came to Eli's room and told Imani that the donor who had covered everything would like to meet her whenever she was ready. Imani frowned. A donor. She hadn't known there was a donor. She'd assumed, in the fog of it all, that Dr. Bellamy had simply made it happen. Conference room B, 4th floor. She smoothed down the same sweater she had been living in for 4 days, kissed her sleeping son on the forehead, told her mother to stay with him, and rode the elevator up. She pushed open the door. A man sat at the far end of a long table. Dark suit, beautifully cut. Silver hair combed neat. Old and tall even sitting down, with deep brown eyes that lifted to meet hers and held something complicated in them. Gratitude and guilt and hope, all trying to stand in the same place. The room tilted under her feet. "You," she whispered. "You're the man from the bus stop." August Bellamy rose, slowly, the way old men rise when something matters. "Yes, ma'am, and I owe you the truth, all of it, so I'm going to stand here and tell it." She didn't sit. She stayed by the door, one hand on the frame. "My name is August Bellamy. I built this hospital." He let it land, and he did not look away from what it did to her face. "That night in the snow, I wasn't pretending to be anybody. I was at the lowest hour of my life. My board had just voted to sell this place, the place I built in my daughter's name, to a firm that would strip it for parts. The loudest vote belonged to my own son. I walked out into that storm because I had nowhere on this earth left to be, and a security guard 50 feet from my own front doors looked straight through me." He paused, and then a young woman with nothing knelt down in the slush and covered me with her child's blanket and put her last $40 in my hand and told me where the warm place was. And she never once asked who I was. Imani's jaw was tight. She was listening the way you listen when you already feel the floor moving. "The next morning I tried to find you. All I had was an apron and a little brass lighthouse on a keyring." His eyes went briefly to her fist, where it was. "And before I could find you, your son came through my doors in the night. And I learned that the boy fighting for his life in my building was the same child my hospital had turned away 3 months ago. 4 phone calls, Ms. Carver, $35,000. The woman who gave a freezing stranger the coat off her child's bed. And my hospital, the one I swore on its front steps would never turn a child away, sent her back out into the cold." The room was very quiet. Somewhere below them, a helicopter was landing on the pad, and neither of them heard it. "You arranged it all," Imani said. "Not a question." Her voice was level. "The surgery, the bills, your son. I made sure nobody ever said the word deposit to you again, and nobody in this building ever will. That was money, and money is the smallest thing I have." He shook his head slowly. "But I did not make my son care. No man alive could have. He walked into that room at 5 in the morning on his own feet, and your boy did the rest." That part was real, Miss Carver. That part I couldn't have bought if I'd spent everything I own." She was silent for a long moment. Then she walked past him to the window and looked out at the gray water. The docks where her father had worked 31 years, the streets she had carried her whole life on her back. When she turned around, her eyes were wet and her voice was steady. And what she said next is the reason this story exists. "I will be grateful every day I am alive," she said. "Every day, for the rest of my life, my son gets to have a life because of what happened in this building. I want you to hear me say that first." She set the brass lighthouse down on the long table between them, gently, like a gavel. "But Mr. Bellamy, what about the next mother? The one who doesn't happen to kneel down in the snow in front of the right stranger? She's downstairs right now. Same bills I had, same flat voice reading her the same policy. Nobody knows her name, and nobody is coming. So you tell me, sir, what happens to her?" The question dropped into August Bellamy like a stone into still water, and the rings went all the way out to the edges of his life. He opened his mouth. He closed it. Because she was right, and he knew it, and a check the size of Ohio would not make her wrong. "That," he said finally, "is the only question worth asking. And I believe I finally have an answer. Give me 1 week." 1 week later, August Bellamy called an emergency meeting of the board of directors. Every seat at the black walnut table was filled. Marcus sat at his father's right hand, and for the first time in years, they were on the same side of it. August stood at the head of the room. He used no notes, no slides, no lawyers. He had given 1,000 speeches in his life. This was not a speech. This was a man settling his account. 55 years ago, he said, I lost a 6-year-old daughter to a tumor in the back of her head because we were young and black and broke in a country that had decided that meant we could wait. I built this hospital so that no parent would ever again stand where I stood. I stood on the front steps of this building with half of Glenville behind me, and I made a promise out loud. This hospital will never turn a child away. He looked slowly down the table and let every one of them feel it. 3 weeks ago, a 6-year-old boy from St. Most, Clare Avenue, nearly died in his mother's arms because this institution told her 4 times to come back with $35,000. He did not almost die because medicine failed him. Medicine was sitting upstairs the whole time, scrubbed in and brilliant. He almost died because we failed him, because I let this place learn to read a balance sheet before it reads a chart. Nobody moved. Let me tell you what country you're doing business in. Around 2/3 of the bankruptcies filed in the United States are tied to medical bills. 100 million Americans are carrying medical debt right now. Tonight, and black families are carrying more than their share of it. The same families this hospital was built to stand beside. And the most common malignant brain tumor in children, the exact thing that killed my daughter and came for that little boy, does not check anybody's insurance before it grows. He let the silence do its work. So here is what happens now. Today, this institution creates the Lighthouse Fund. It will cover, in full, the cost of neurosurgical care for any child under 18 whose family cannot pay. No deposit, no clearance, no exceptions. It will be funded with 15% of this institution's annual operating surplus every year, permanently. A man in a charcoal suit leaned forward. August, be serious. 15% of surplus is millions of dollars a year. Sterling will walk away from the table. The shareholders will never ratify it. Then I will buy them out. He said it as plainly as a man ordering his coffee. Every share. With my own assets, every dollar of which this city helped me make. And I will convert this hospital into a nonprofit, which is what it should have been the day I broke ground. My attorneys have had the papers drawn for 4 days. Sterling Health Partners can take their offer back to Dallas, and they can read about us in the paper. You could hear the snow against the windows. Then Marcus stood up, and every eye in the room turned to him, because everyone there knew which way the wind had been blowing through Marcus Bellamy a month ago. I've spent 15 years becoming one of the best in the world at what I do, he said, and I got so good at the science that I forgot what it was for. I started seeing margins where I was trained to see children. 3 weeks ago, a 6-year-old patient showed me a drawing. He had drawn his mother as a lighthouse, holding the light up over dark water, and he told me she was the part that doesn't fall down. And I stood in that doorway and realized I could no longer see the people at the other end of my own hands. He looked at his father and then back at the room. I'm committing 2 surgeries a month through the Lighthouse Fund at no charge. For as long as these hands hold steady, and I'm starting a teaching program for every resident who comes through this building because precision without mercy is just a very expensive way to miss the point. August looked at his son. His son looked back at him, and the thing that had been broken between them since long before any boardroom, quietly, without a word, began to close. The board grumbled and lawyered and voted, and it did not matter, because the man who built the place had already decided, and by Friday the papers were signed. Sterling went back to Dallas. The stock certificates went into a drawer of history, and the Bellamy Children's Institute became what its front steps had always promised it was. And here's the part of this story I need you to sit with, because it is the part the angry version of this story would have gotten wrong. Nobody was punished. The woman in the gray cardigan was not fired and was not shamed. August sat with her for an hour and listened, and learned that she had been reading that policy aloud for 9 years and going home sick about it for 8 of them, and she became one of the first people retrained for the new family services team, because August Bellamy understood the difference between a symptom and a disease. The security guard kept his job and got new training and never knew the old man he'd waved off a bench. The board members who voted to sell were not paraded or named. The system had taught all of them to look away. The cure was not revenge. The cure was changing what the system taught. After the meeting, August asked Imani to come up to his office. She came straight from Eli's room, where her son was sitting up eating red Jell-O and complaining gloriously, normally, about the itchy gown. "This hospital needs a new physician," August said. "Somebody whose entire job is to make sure no parent ever sits in that waiting room alone, drowning in paperwork and fear, getting read a policy in a flat voice. We're calling it a family advocate. It pays $58,500 a year. Full benefits, health, dental, vision. I want it to be you." Imani stared at him. "Mr. Bellamy, I prep greens and clean offices and braid hair on Sundays. I'm not a nurse. I don't have letters behind my name. You fought this entire system for 3 months with $11 in your pocket, and you did not lose yourself doing it," August said. "You know which forms have trapdoors in them. You know what the phone sounds like at 2 in the morning. You know what it costs a proud woman to ask, and exactly how it feels when the answer is a policy. There is no degree on this earth that teaches what you already know. These families don't need one more person above them. They need somebody beside them, somebody who speaks their language because she has prayed in it." He paused. "When you sat in that waiting room, you swore you'd find a way. I'm asking you to spend the rest of your career helping other mothers find theirs." Imani was quiet for a long time. She thought about the woman in the gray cardigan, and the word deposit, and $11, and the loneliest chair in the world. "I'll do it," she said, "but not for the money, Mr. Bellamy. So, let's be clear about that on day 1. I'll do it because I know exactly what that chair feels like, and as long as I am drawing breath, nobody is going to sit in it alone." August Bellamy smiled then, a real one, the kind that came up from somewhere around 1971. "Welcome to the Bellamy Children's Institute, Miss Carver." 2 Sundays later, Eli Carver walked into New Hope Missionary Baptist Church in a clip-on bow tie with a fresh lineup from Mr. Perret. Ray, a little thinner, a little careful on the stairs, gloriously alive. The congregation came up off the pews like the roof had lifted. Mother Hattie cried into her good handkerchief. Pastor Green preached on the Samaritan and looked dead at nobody and everybody and said, "Church, sometimes you entertain angels unaware, and sometimes, beloved, you are the angel and don't know it." And in the third pew from the front, Ernestine Carver held her grandson's hand through the whole service and hummed under the choir, off in her own key, exactly the way her husband used to like it. 1 year later, that light had reached children who would never know Eli Carver's name. 1 year later, Elijah Carver was 7 years old, and he was riding a bike around the lake. It had not been easy, and you deserve the truth of that. There had been radiation and chemotherapy and a stretch of months when his balance came back slower than his smile, when he had to hunt for words that used to come running, when Imani sat through the night counting his breaths, the old way. But the boy did his exercises like his grandfather did a shift, head down, no complaints, and on a bright, cold Saturday by Lake Erie, he stood up on the pedals with the wind off the water in his face. And his mother ran behind him exactly 4 steps before she realized he didn't need her hand on the seat anymore, and then she stopped and watched him go, and let him, faster than the wind, just like she promised. Across the city, on a Tuesday morning, Imani Carver stood in a hallway on the 3rd floor of the Bellamy Children's Institute, wearing a navy blazer and a badge that read Family Advocate. In a plastic chair in front of her sat a young father from the West Side, 25 at the most, holding a stack of bills and a referral letter in hands that wouldn't stay still, wearing the exact face she used to wear, the one that has done the math and lost. She knelt down in front of him, the way you kneel in snow, and took both of his hands. "Look at me," she said. "I have sat in this exact chair. I know what the numbers on those papers say, and I know what the voice on that phone sounds like, and I am telling you, that part is over. The Lighthouse Fund exists for your daughter. No deposit, no clearance, no exceptions. You are not going to do one single step of this alone." And she watched hope break through on a stranger's face, the way dawn breaks over water, and she understood that this exact moment, was what her father had been lighting her toward the whole time. In its first year, the Lighthouse Fund paid in full for 39 children, 39 families who would have been read a policy in a flat voice and sent back out into the cold. 39 kids who got to grow up. The fund's plaque in the lobby doesn't carry August's name, or Marcus's, or even Eli's. It carries a single line of brass letters that the maintenance crew polishes without being asked. Keep your light on. Marcus Bellamy did his 2 surgeries a month and never once let anyone call them charity in his hearing. He kept Eli's drawing in his office, framed, where the diplomas used to hang the most prominently. And when a new resident asked him about it, he would tell them the whole story and end it the same way every time. The scan tells you where the tumor is. It will never tell you who the child is. Your job is both. He and his father had dinner every Sunday now. Ernestine's recipe for smothered turkey wings, badly executed and proudly served. They did not always agree. They always showed up. Imani found quiet ways to close her circles, because that is who raised her. Mother Hattie's light bill got paid, anonymously, for a year, and Mother Hattie told the whole church she suspected the Lord, and Imani did not correct her. Earl Dawkins got season tickets to the Browns from a grateful somebody, and wore the cap everywhere, including, Miss Odell complained, over the dish sink. Miss Dorothy the bus driver received a commendation from the Transit Authority, and more to the point a crayon drawing of a city bus with a lighthouse beam coming off the front of it, which she taped above her fare box and defended from 3 supervisors. And the Corolla finally died for good in March. And the man at the lot on Carnegie could not explain to Imani why the certified little hatchback she'd been eyeing had already been paid down to almost nothing. And August Bellamy never did learn to look innocent. And every so often, Augusta walked the lakefront in the cold. An old man in a good coat, past one particular bus shelter with a cracked plastic roof. He never let them fix it. He told the city he'd pay for a new one on every corner in Glenville. And he did. But that one stayed exactly as it was, because the world looks different from a bench than it does from the 9th floor. And August Bellamy never intended to forget the view again. That evening, Imani came home to the apartment in Glenville. The same block, the same church 3 streets over, because leaving had never been the dream. Breathing had. But there was a second bedroom now, and heat that worked without arguing, and a window that faced east over the rooftops toward the water. Ellie slammed into her legs at the door, all elbows and grass smell, and boy, and she scooped him up even though he was getting too big for it. Because mothers know exactly how many of those pickups they have left, and they intend to use every one. "I beat Damon to the corner today," he announced. "By a lot. He says he let me win. He's a liar." "Be gracious," she said, laughing, and set him down, and he thundered off to his room to draw. And as she hung her coat by the door, her eyes went where they went every evening. On the wall above the shelf, in a simple wooden frame, hung a pencil drawing on the back of a hospital admission form. A tall white tower, one yellow window burning at the top. A small figure with braids standing down on the rocks, holding a ring of keys, holding the whole thing up. And on the shelf just beneath it, in the most honored spot in that whole warm apartment, sitting where some houses put trophies and some put crystal, was a small brass lighthouse keychain, scratched soft and dull by 40 years of pockets, by a man who worked the water, by a daughter who walked through fire, by a grandson who came back from the dark. Keep your light on, baby. She finally believed it. Here is the thing. Kindness never tells you up front. It does not pay you back on your schedule. It does not pay you back in your currency. Sometimes it pays you back years later, through a stranger's hands, in the dark, long after you've forgotten you ever gave anything at all. Imani Carver did not give away a blanket that night. She gave away proof. Proof that the world her father described to her was real, and the proof landed in the one pair of hands in Cleveland that could do something about it. So before you go, let me leave you with the question that has not let go of me since I finished writing this one. That little boy is alive today because his mother happened to kneel down in the snow in front of exactly the right stranger. So tell me, was that a miracle? Or was that the failure? Should any child's life ever come down to that kind of luck? Put your answer in the comments, and read a few replies before you write yours, because I promise you, this one is going to divide the room. If you believe quiet kindness still counts, even when nobody is watching, even when it never gets repaid, subscribe and stay with us, because telling these stories is the whole reason this channel exists. Share this one with somebody who showed up for you when no one else did. They should hear it today, and they should hear it from you. This story is a work of fiction. The names, characters, and events were created for this telling. But Forest City Hospital was real, and the cold is real, and the bills are real, and so are the people in every neighborhood like this one, who will hand you the last warm thing they own without ever asking who you are. I have met a few of them in my life. I suspect you have too. Be one of them when you get the chance. Keep your light on.